All right. Good morning, Kaylee. This should hopefully be the last video for you. We ended up talking about the XYZ affair, and that's where the American diplomats went over and were told they needed to bribe the French government in order to talk to them, and that is an incredible international insult. It's the kind of thing that we would just laugh at today, but when we're a young country, it's a pretty big deal. So the result of the XYZ affair is that America decides, not the government, but the American people are fired up to go to war. We are full of war hawks. We are small dogs that we can take on anything. The truth is we would have gotten crushed if we went to war with either France or England. And neither one of them particularly wanted to go to war with us because they were busy getting ready to fight each other. So inside America, we get war fever. War fever is when Americans decide it is time to declare war on somebody. And not necessarily like getting attacked, but we want to go attack someone else. Obviously, if we get attacked, then we want to go to war. But this is the concept that we should attack someone else. So the American people, not all of them, but a lot of them decide, let's go fight France. Luckily for us, John Adams is going to be a calmer head, and he's going to refuse to do it. In particular, John Adams' party, Federalists, really want to go to war. They're eager to prove that America's a strong country, that we can stand up to everyone else, that we let that new Constitution of ours kind of flex its muscles. John Adams does not go to war, but he does get Congress to pass enough money to create a Department of the Navy. And all of the ships that had been the cargo had been being seized, and the American sailors that had been being impressed, all of it was a result of the fact that we did not have a Navy, that we could not defend our ships at sea. So if we're going to ever be taken serious as a country, we needed a Navy. Now, navies are incredibly expensive and take an incredibly long time to build. The Navy that we're going to build is going to be smaller than everyone else's Navy, and it's going to be full of these guys, which are called clippers. They're fantastic ships. They're smaller. They're extremely fast, which means they're easy and quick to build. So he's going to create the Department of the Navy to get that Navy built. Once the Navy is built, the Department of the Navy is going to be folded into the Department of War, which we now call the Department of Defense. But if it started out as its own department. As a result of us building our Navy, and as a result of our anger with the French, we enter what's called a quasi-war or an unofficial war, where we have not declared war, but we are openly attacking each other on the ocean or on the high seas. Despite the fact that we're openly attacking each other, Adams does manage to avoid the full declaration of war because he sends another group of diplomats over. All of the Republicans did not want to fight France. Remember, the Republicans loved France. And some Federalists saw the folly of trying to declare war on a world power. In particular, a world power that helped us beat the British in the Revolutionary War just 15, 20 years ago. So Adams sends another delegation to France, and this time, instead of dealing with that weird government that was in charge after the Reign of Terror, we got Napoleon. Now, Napoleon has taken over France, and he is a dictator. He's an emperor. And he is in charge and smart. Napoleon's introduced a bunch of reforms. He's got France back under control, and he realizes he already has, 15 enemies in the world. He doesn't need another one. So Napoleon simply agrees to stop touching our ships. England never did that. England's going to continue seizing our cargo. But France is going to stop doing it at this point because they want one less enemy in the world. And Adams is incredibly pleased with himself, and he feels he should be known as the guy that prevented war, which he should have. But he's never going to be known as that because his next move was probably one of the worst things that's ever happened in American history that wasn't a war. So when Adams keeps us out of the war, he angers his own party. The Federalists now hate him. The Republicans hate him because he's a Federalist, and he's going to lose his next election. So after that, John Adams passes the Alien and Sedition Acts, and they're cheating. This is the Federalists passing laws to help them win an election. It's the exact thing we were afraid that political parties would do in America and why we didn't want them. The very first time we had a contested election where two parties wanted to win, the party that won immediately used their new power to try to hurt the party that lost. And the Alien and Sedition Acts were terrible laws. They're going to be struck down later. It's just a dark moment in American history. One of them was anti-immigration, Immigrants were feared by the Federalists because they were going to bring dangerous new ideas, especially French immigrants that came over, and just lived through the reign of terror. We certainly didn't want that going on here. But the bigger problem was that we were afraid that these foreigners, these immigrants, were going to vote Republican. And the Federalists didn't want new Republicans. A lot of these guys were farmers. Farmers are Republicans. So they made a law that made it really hard for people to become new citizens. So the Alien Act, alien is an old word for immigrant. The Alien Act made it hard to become an American citizen. We'll talk about that one first. The Alien Act targets immigrants. The Sedition Act specifically targets Republicans, and specifically Republicans who spoke out against the Federalists, which is what political parties do. So, the Alien Act simply made it harder to become an American citizen by changing the number of years required to be here from 5 to 14, which is a lot. But more importantly, we are 10 years into the Constitution, which means anybody that came here in the last 10 years was eligible to become a citizen, and now they aren't. Anybody that came in the last few years are going to have to wait another 14, which means these immigrants aren't going to be able to participate in the next several elections, and that's really what the Federalists want, is they didn't want these new Republicans to vote. They used the excuse of revolutionary ideas, but it was really about winning the election. More particularly dangerous is under the Alien Act, the president can deport anybody or imprison anybody he considered dangerous, any immigrant that he considered dangerous. And this is just terrible policy. It's the kind of thing a king can do. We have constitutional amendments that say that everybody gets a right to a trial, and they can't throw anybody in jail without a trial. We have constitutional amendments that says you can't discriminate against people based on where they were born. We got all this stuff in there, and this Alien Act violates all of it. All of it. And then, even worse, is the Sedition Act. The Sedition Act, sedition is when you advocate or speak out for the overthrow of a government or the resistance to lawful authority. It's actually something that's already legal in America. We don't want people trying to overthrow the government. It's illegal in almost every country. What the Sedition Act did is add stuff to what was considered sedition. So not only is trying to overthrow the government illegal, but now it's also illegal to say anything that insults or is false about the president, Congress, or the government. Well, the whole point of free speech, the whole reason we wrote the First Amendment and made freedom of speech the most important thing in the Constitution, is so that you can speak out against the government. That's the whole point. So the sedition is a direct violation of the First Amendment. It's a direct violation of freedom of speech. And it was made to make it so that the Republicans couldn't say bad things about the Federalists. The Federalists were running the government. They had won the election. Now they immediately made it illegal to say bad things about the Federalists. Well, when you campaign because you want to win the next election, you say bad things about the opposing side. So this isn't going to get used that much, but who it is used on is editors and printers of newspapers. And that is the internet of the time. That's literally the people telling people what's wrong with the government. The whole point of a newspaper, the whole point of freedom of press is to tell people what the government's screwing up at. The Sedition Act made it illegal to tell the American people that the government's doing a bad job. It's completely illegal. It's terrible. Why did they pass it? It's just to win the election. The Republicans, of course, are furious about both laws because both laws directly, in the case of immigrants, because they're going to vote for the Republicans, or because in the case of the Sedition Act, because the Republicans are the ones speaking out against the government. They're both just meant to destroy the Republican Party. At this point, it should have been struck down. Those laws were terrible. The Supreme Court should have stood up and said, those laws are unconstitutional, but we did not have Marbury versus Madison yet. The Supreme Court could not establish that it was unconstitutional yet. In about 10 years, they could have, but it's too early for that. So James Madison and Thomas Jefferson instead say, if you're going to pass unconstitutional laws, we're not going to follow them. We, the state of Virginia, don't have to follow federal laws if they're unconstitutional. This concept is called nullification, and it's not a word you're going to see elsewhere. But to nullify means to make something neutral or to make something not useful anymore. And to nullify a law means it no longer counts. We can't have that in America. We can't have states decide which federal laws are going to be followed and which ones aren't. Were these terrible laws, and should they have not been followed? Absolutely. But states don't get to decide that. It's like if your parents make a rule, even if it's a terrible rule, your job is to fix the rule, not to decide not to follow it. Okay? So they had to follow it. They actually tried to rally a bunch of people around their cause and say, hey, guys, what about this nullification concept? Nobody should follow this law, but Congress did not support them. They said, look, it's a federal law. We have to follow it. If you don't like it, change the law. But you don't get to choose not to follow it. Luckily for the Republicans, the law had a ticking time bomb in them. It was only supposed to last 2 years. So we're going to pass this law. In 2 years, we're going to come back, and we're going to see if it's working or if we want to get rid of it. Well, after 2 years, they said, A, we don't need this law, but B, the Republicans were now in charge, and they hated the law in the first place. So it didn't really hurt that much, but what it did do is create the first of the many cracks that are going to create the Civil War. The concept that a state could debate and decide if they had to follow federal law. In the long term, that's what becomes a Civil War, when the South decides that they're not going to follow federal law. And then the federal law said, yes, you will. And they said, fine, then we're going to leave. So this terrible, terrible set of laws were obviously terrible, but they also, in the long run, created the Civil War. Because now states started talking about the fact that the Union is a union of states. And since states volunteered to join the Union, they didn't necessarily have to follow all the rules of the Union. So over time, as the federal government passes more and more laws about things like slavery and stuff that the South doesn't like, they're going to start refusing to follow those laws. And that turns into the Civil War. So those terrible laws, in the long run, created the Civil War. Okay, that's it. Let me know if you need anything else. I hope you'll get caught up, and please email me with anything I can help you. Have a great day.